Welcome to Jade Platform Insights. Today we're going to be presenting Introduction to Orb, Jade's HTML over the wire web framework. We'll be covering what is Orb, what is HTML over the wire, the building blocks that you would use to construct an Orb application, and covering various features that the framework provides. So what is Orb? Orb is a native web framework for the Jade platform. It allows you to utilize Jade Platform concepts such as classes, methods, and interfaces, and use them as building blocks to create a web application. It lets you use your system's native data model to display information onto the web page and to see changes to objects as they happen, reflected live onto the web page, and to essentially web enable your Jade application using modern web development concepts. Orb is provided as a package schema. You can download Orb from the Jade Platform extensions page on the Development Center. Once Orb is downloaded, you can load the Orb schemas into your system as usual, and then you import the Orb package into your application schema. Once Orb is imported, you'll see the Orb class in your schema, and the Orb API is provided all as type methods on the Orb class, so they can be called without needing to instantiate any objects. So what is HTML over the wire? It is a server-side rendering concept, as opposed to client-side rendering common with JavaScript frameworks. The idea is you render the full page on the server and send that to the browser, and as the page needs to change, you can update only the pieces of the page that need to be changed. It is essentially how Ajax used to work in the mid-2000s. However, unlike Ajax, we cut out the middleman, just sending raw HTML. It is simple, you're just sending HTML. This approach is very fast. It is also very efficient. Essentially, every byte of HTML that is sent ends up being displayed in the web browser, so there is virtually no overhead. And we'll cover the various building blocks that you would use to construct your Orb application. Templates are the major building block. These can be HTML templates, a full layout sent to the web browser, or a template can be a snippet of HTML used to format data. Dynamic templates allow you to use Jade code to determine what the output will look like in the web browser. So in this example, we're outputting a number, but only if that number is greater than 0, otherwise we output nothing. Orb provides the bind method, a very powerful method that allows you to create a binary representation of your HTML for sending to the web browser. So in this example, we're returning the result of calling the bind method on our main template layout, and that will produce a binary representation of that HTML. In another example, we're setting up attributes on an object and associating that object with a message template. So if this is our message template, that combines that object with the template to produce a binary representation. And when that's sent to the browser, that will appear in the browser as this HTML. One use for dynamic templates is choosing between different HTML templates to bind with. This example is choosing between 3 different bind calls based on the logic in the code. Templates don't need to be static. There are also special directives that the Orb templating engine will replace as it is rendering the HTML. For example, here is all of the special directives in this template, and we will cover what they all do. The first is the property directive. It expands the value of an attribute on your object and inserts it into the HTML. For example, This is our message template, and it has two property directives. There is time and there is message. So we have an object with the message and time attributes set, and a bind call is made to associate that object with this message template. This results in this HTML. You can embed a template into another template with the embedded template directive. For example, we have this HTML, but we could break out the form element in the HTML into its own template. And if we called that template something like message form, then we could remove that from the original template and just embed it, and it would produce the exact same result. Astute observers will notice that there is another embedded template already in this template. That is this message template here, although it has a second parameter specifying a collection, all messages. So what happens here is each object in that collection is expanded in turn using that template. And then the attributes on that template, on that object, will be used to fill in the attribute directives in that message template. You can have your template call a method, and it will insert the return value of that method into the HTML. For example, in our previous template, we were just outputting the raw value of the time attribute, which was the full value of a timestamp converted to a string. If we wanted more control over what it was output, you can use the executable directive to have it call a time formatted method. If our time formatted method looked like this, then this is our old output, just outputting the raw value of the timestamp. And when we change that to our time to call our time formatted method, it produces our formatted result instead. Org has comment syntax to remove any comments or documentation that you want to include in your templates before they are sent to the web browser. You can put normal HTML comments in your templates, but even though they're not displayed on the page, HTML comments are still visible in the browser source. If this isn't what you want, you can use org comments, and the org comment is completely stripped away before it is sent to the web browser. Org comments can also be multiple lines, such as here, and you can also use org comments to comment out other directives. Org comments are deleted before anything else is done, so in this example, that time formatted method will never be called. It will be removed before any further processing happens. The next major building block is routes. A route is essentially a Jade class that can respond to a web request. Any class can become an org route by implementing the iOrg route interface, and this provides the two methods execute and render. You can then associate your route class with a URL endpoint by using the add route method. When that URL endpoint is invoked, the route class associated with it is instantiated, and an execute method is called. So in this example, the execute method is creating an object. Then the execute method returns an integer. This can be any integer value that is meaningful to your application, but it all does provide some constants to indicate success and failure. After the execute method returns, the render method is called, and the execute result is passed in, and you could have conditional logic that changes what happens based on the value of that execute result. But in this example, we're just returning the result of calling the bind method on our main template, and that will send the HTML return from that main template to the web browser to display. You can put properties on your route classes, and these properties will be automatically populated based on data sent in the request. In a GET request, the properties are populated from the query string of the URL, and in a POST request, they're populated from the submitted form data. So in this example, we have our message route class, and it has two attributes, image and message. So if we, in our execute method, we can access the values of both of these, and they will be filled in based on the request sent by the browser. We'll now cover some of the features that the framework provides, starting with data attributes. HTML5 allows web applications to specify their own attributes for use on HTML elements. To avoid these conflicting with existing standard attributes, they're prefixed with data and a hyphen, so they're called data attributes. Org provides several of these, and we'll cover what they all do. The data org live attribute brings an element to life. It makes it start live updates to automatically watch a collection or object, and that element will be automatically updated when that collection or object or an object in that collection is changed in some way. For example, here is a div which declares a data org live attribute, and it specifies the chat endpoint. So if we provided a route with /chat in a class, then the render method of that route should call the live update method and specify the collection that it wants to watch and the template for it to be expanded by. And then when anything changes in that all messages template, that div will be automatically updated to reflect those changes on the web page without the page needing to be reloaded. Triggers make it possible for an element to be interacted with by clicking or tapping on a phone. A trigger sends a request and can update the page based on the response from that request. For example, here is some HTML, and this could be rendered like this. Those login and register buttons in HTML declare a data org trigger attribute. For example, the login button specifies that it will send a request to the login form endpoint. So if we had an endpoint specified like this, then our render method could simply be this, to call bind and pass the result of calling bind on our login template, which would just send the static HTML of the login template to the web browser. If our login template looks something like this, you'll notice that it has the outermost element of this template is the ID main-display. And the outermost element of our welcome page also had the ID main-display. So when that HTML is returned from the route, this HTML will be replaced on the page with the element that has the matching ID. So our welcome page, when the login button is tapped, will be replaced by the login form. And this is how triggers can be used to update a page. Triggers can also specify parameters that will be automatically sent in the request. In this example, it specifies two additional parameters, torque and rating. So when this element is clicked or tapped, the rating and torque attributes on that route will be automatically populated by the data in that attribute. The data org submit attribute essentially turns a form into an org trigger, so that when the form is submitted, it can send a request without needing to reload the page. In this example, the form specifies data org submit. When this form is submitted, the input elements in this form will be automatically submitted, and their attributes will be treated exactly the same as if they were attributes on a trigger. For example, an attribute called message in this example will be automatically populated with the contents of the message element. You can also submit forms as normal using the standard method and action attributes, but this makes it possible to submit a form without the page being changed or reloaded. The org navigate attribute updates the org view of the current page. Views are a subframework of org that simplify making it possible to make an app that has multiple different pages. For example, here is a button that when clicked will navigate to a different page. You could also have your data org navigate directive on an A tag. When you're specifying an A tag, you probably also want to specify the href attribute. For example, middle clicking it works as expected, and that web crawlers are able to access it as they expect to. So on an A tag, you're able to just leave the org navigate target blank, and it will automatically target the href attribute. Or you can also specify href if you don't want to leave the attribute blank, and it will do exactly the same thing. If Views should be added using the add view method, and the render method of the view should set up a view controller and pass it to the orb view method. Views could be an entire presentation on their own, and in fact, they will be, so stay tuned for that, coming sometime in the future. The orb hook attribute makes it possible to run client-side JavaScript in response to an action taken via orb. For example, this element declares an orb hook targeting the function modal open. That function should be created in JavaScript, such as this, as a member of the orb.hooks object. Then when that element that declares the data orb hook attribute appears on page, for example, if it's inserted into the page by a trigger, then that modal open function will be automatically called. So this makes it possible for orb to instruct the page to execute client-side code in response to server-side actions. This makes it possible to integrate orb with other JavaScript libraries or any custom JavaScript that you want to use. The data orb ID attribute identifies the object used with live updates. It is what makes it possible for orb to be able to update and remove objects from a page, as it identifies the object for orb. The data orb ID attribute should be set to the value of the special orb ID directive. The next major feature is sessions. In orb, you're able to associate any persistent object with the browser session. For example, this is the execute method of a login route. It retrieves a user object, checks if that user is valid, and then checks if the password that was entered was valid. If it was, it starts a new session associating that user, the retrieved user object, with the browser session. And then it specifies an expiry and also a timeout. The session data method is used to check if the browser has an active orb session or not. It returns true if it does and false otherwise. If the session data method returns true, it also populates the parameter that is passed with the object that was associated with the session. So in this example, this is retrieving the user object that was associated with the session, where session start was called. You can also terminate a session with the session end method. This invalidates the session in orb and tells the browser to delete any cookies associated with the session. And that is all we have for you today. Thank you for watching.